The evening was calm outside, but inside the restaurant everything shined with lights and whispers of people in fine clothes. It was one of those places where the chairs were covered in velvet and the walls carried golden frames, where the chandeliers sparkled above the guests as if each light was trying to prove its worth. The tables were perfectly dressed with white linen, polished silverware, and glasses that caught every reflection of light. It was the kind of place where only the wealthy came, people who did not think twice before ordering the most expensive dish on the menu, people who spoke loudly as if the world belonged to them. In this grand place worked a young waitress named Layla. She wore a simple uniform, black trousers and a crisp white shirt with a small apron. Nothing about her outfit matched the glamour of the guests, yet she carried herself with quiet dignity. Her shoes were slightly worn out from long hours, but her smile remained fresh. She had learned that in a place where people measured others by money and power, the best armor was politeness and calm. Every step she took was careful. She balanced trays of sparkling drinks, steaming dishes, and desserts that looked like art, moving with the grace of someone who had done this many times before. Layla had grown up in a modest family. Her father worked as a driver and her mother sold handmade crafts at the market. They did not have much, but they believed in education, they believed in respect, and they believed that kindness was worth more than gold. Because of this, Layla always remembered her parents' words even while working in such a place. She never let arrogance of others break her spirit. Her eyes often wandered around the restaurant, watching how people behaved. Some smiled at her, others hardly noticed she existed. But she never forgot that every person, no matter how rich or poor, was just a person. The restaurant itself had a rhythm, the sound of plates being placed gently on tables, the laughter of businessmen sharing stories, the sharp clinking of wine glasses, and the soft music played by a pianist in the corner. It was almost like a theater, every evening a performance. The guests were the actors showing off their wealth, and the staff were the silent crew making sure the show ran smoothly. Layla was part of this crew, but she always felt she was also an observer, seeing both the beauty and the hidden arrogance of the world inside those walls. She noticed how some guests spoke kindly, asking her name, thanking her for service, treating her as human. Those moments warmed her heart. But then there were others, the ones who waved their hands impatiently, who snapped their fingers as if she was invisible until needed. Those moments made her feel small, but she refused to let the bitterness grow. Instead, she took those feelings and promised herself that one day she would rise above this job. She dreamed of becoming an interpreter, of traveling, of using the languages she studied at night, after long shifts, when the city was asleep. Her co-workers admired her, though they rarely said it out loud. They saw how she managed to keep calm even with the most difficult customers, how she never dropped her smile, how she carried trays heavier than they looked, and never complained. Layla often helped new waiters when they struggled, whispering to them not to panic, reminding them to breathe, and showing them how to move smoothly between tables. She believed that helping each other made the long hours less painful. In her heart she was proud, even if the world around her often made her feel small. That night, as she adjusted the silverware on a table set for an important guest, she felt the same mixture of tiredness and determination she always carried. The glow of chandeliers made her eyes shimmer even if no one noticed. Her reflection in the polished glass looked like a young woman ready for a life bigger than this place. Yet for now she had to keep serving. Because her family depended on her salary, she thought of her younger brother at school, her mother's hopeful eyes, her father's quiet strength. These thoughts gave her energy to stand straight and keep moving. As the evening grew busier, the restaurant filled with voices of different accents, men and women talking about business deals, expensive vacations, new cars, and stocks. Their laughter sometimes seemed heavy, almost showing off more than joy. Layla moved among them like a quiet shadow, listening but never belonging to their world. Still, she held no jealousy. She had learned that money did not always bring kindness, and kindness was something she valued more than diamonds. Every detail in that restaurant reminded her of the two worlds that existed side by side, one of gold and pride, the other of sweat and quiet hard work. She carried plates of roasted lamb, glasses of champagne, trays of colorful desserts that looked too pretty to eat, and each time she placed something on a table, she whispered a polite thank you. Sometimes she received a nod, sometimes nothing at all, but she never let her hand tremble. She never let her smile fade. There was something poetic about her presence in that glamorous restaurant. She was like a hidden star, small but shining in her own way, unnoticed by most. but carrying a story stronger than the luxury around her. In that world of glittering chandeliers and polished marble floors, Layla stood as a quiet reminder that true worth does not always sit at the table. Sometimes it walks between them, carrying trays, wearing simple clothes, but holding inside dreams far greater than any expensive meal. Goodbye. That night would begin like any other, with Layla moving from table to table, the restaurant sparkling with laughter and wealth. Yet destiny was quietly preparing a moment that would change everything. She did not know it yet. But before the night ended, her voice would echo through that glamorous place in a way no one expected, and all the glitter of money would suddenly seem smaller compared to the courage of a waitress with a secret strength. The night was moving smoothly. The restaurant had already filled with wealthy families, travelers, and businessmen. The sound of laughter mixed with the soft piano music in the corner. Waiters moved quickly, balancing trays and glasses, and Layla kept her usual calm smile as she served table after table. It felt like any other evening. Yet something in the air hinted that this night would be different, that something unusual was about to happen. Then the heavy glass doors opened, and in walked a man whose presence instantly drew every eye in the room. He was a billionaire, a man whose name often appeared in newspapers and business magazines. His fortune was built from oil, real estate, and technology investments. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed the world belonged to him. Tall, dressed in an expensive tailored suit that looked like it had been made only for him. Shoes polished until they reflected the light of the chandeliers. A large gold watch shining on his wrist. Even before he spoke, everyone around knew. This was not just another rich customer. This was a man who enjoyed being the center of attention. Behind him came his entourage, a group of younger businessmen and bodyguards, all trying to mirror his confidence but none of them carrying his boldness. They pulled chairs for him at a large round table in the center of the restaurant. The kind of table chosen not for privacy but for visibility. Because he wanted everyone to see him, to know he had arrived. Waiters rushed to serve them, pulling out menus and offering the finest wine. The pianist in the corner adjusted his tune, almost unconsciously, as if the arrival of such a guest demanded grander music. Layla noticed him immediately, not because she admired him, but because she had seen his type before. Wealthy men who came to the restaurant not only to eat but to display their power, to prove their superiority to the staff and sometimes even to their own friends. She watched quietly from a distance as he threw back his shoulders and laughed loudly, greeting his companions in a booming voice. He spoke with the authority of a man used to commanding attention, and the others responded with polite chuckles, nodding, agreeing with everything he said, even when his words carried arrogance. When the manager whispered to Layla that she would be serving this table, she felt a small twist in her stomach. She did not show it. But she knew this would not be an easy task. Serving wealthy guests often required more patience than skill. And this man was clearly not one who would show kindness to a waitress. Still, she nodded with her calm professionalism, picked up her small notepad, and approached the table, her heart steady but alert. She reminded herself of her father's words about dignity. No matter how others behave, always carry yourself with grace. As she walked toward the table, she heard the billionaire's booming laughter echo across the room. He spoke to his friends about a deal he had closed earlier that day, boasting about the millions he had earned in a single hour. As if money were as easy as breathing for him, his companions clapped his back, raising glasses to toast his success, and he leaned back in his chair, satisfied with their admiration. He had the air of a man who wanted not just to be wealthy but to be worshipped for his wealth, and everyone at his table played their part. Layla reached the table, her smile soft but professional. She asked politely if she could take their orders, her voice steady though she knew from his glance that he barely noticed her as a person. He looked at her as one might look at a servant, an accessory of the restaurant, not someone with thoughts or dreams. He exchanged a smirk with one of his friends, speaking in a lower voice, as if he were already preparing a joke, but she did not react. She stood patiently, waiting, pen ready to write, calm as ever. The billionaire barely glanced at the menu before ordering the most expensive dishes, roasted lamb, fine caviar, the rarest bottle of wine, his voice commanding and dismissive, as though ordering was not a request but a declaration. His companions followed quickly, each one trying to order something equally expensive. Because no one wanted to look small at his table, Layla wrote everything down without a flicker of expression. She had seen this kind of performance before, the need to show power. Through food and drink, the need to remind the world of their status. After giving the order, the billionaire leaned back, letting out another laugh, this time softer, directed toward Layla as she prepared to leave. He switched to Arabic, a language he assumed she would not understand. He made a remark to his friends about the waitress, mocking her simple uniform, her tired shoes, even joking that her only future would be clearing tables for men like him. His words were sharp but disguised behind laughter, and his companions chuckled, enjoying the cruelty that seemed harmless to them because they believed she could not comprehend. Layla felt the words strike her heart. She understood every syllable, yet she did not let her face change. She turned and walked calmly back toward the kitchen, her back straight, her movements graceful. But inside her chest, something stirred. She had served many arrogant customers before, but the deliberate cruelty in his tone was different. It carried the weight of someone who thought money gave him the right to belittle others. She reminded herself to stay calm, to wait, because the night was still young, and the arrogance of this man had only just begun to reveal itself. The billionaire continued talking in Arabic with his friends, laughing, believing he had thrown words into the air where they would vanish without meaning. But those words did not vanish. They stayed, echoing in Layla's mind, and though she returned to her tasks, carrying trays and pouring drinks for other tables, she kept an eye on the group at the center. Their laughter too loud, their gestures too grand, she knew something was building. Something that would not end quietly, and though he did not know it yet, the billionaire had already set the stage for his own humiliation, because the waitress he mocked was not as simple as he thought. The food orders had been placed, the wine had been poured, and the laughter at the billionaire's table grew louder with every passing minute. The restaurant itself glowed under the golden lights, but at that one table the atmosphere carried something sharper, something that felt like pride mixed with cruelty. Layla walked back and forth between her other tables, serving families and couples with her usual calm. But her ears caught every word that floated from the billionaire's group, especially when he lowered his voice into Arabic, thinking no one else around could understand. At first, the comments were small, little remarks about the dishes, about the speed of the service. But then his tone shifted, it became playful in a cruel way. He leaned closer to his friends and whispered while his eyes followed Layla as she moved between the tables. He commented about her shoes, saying in Arabic that they looked like they belonged to someone who walked the streets too long, someone with no future. His friends chuckled, shaking their heads, pretending they found it amusing. Though deep down even they knew the words carried unnecessary cruelty, yet none of them dared to stop him. As Layla returned to refill their glasses, she heard another comment, this time about her job. He said in Arabic that waitressing was the kind of work for people who had no dreams, that she would grow old carrying trays, bending to serve men like him, never reaching anywhere in life. The laughter from his companions grew louder. One of them even tapped the table as if it were the funniest thing he had heard. Layla's hand stayed steady. She poured the wine carefully, her face a mask of politeness, but inside her chest, the words cut deep, because she understood them all too well. When she turned to leave, he spoke again, louder this time, making sure his friends heard. He joked that maybe she could marry a rich man if she was lucky, but most likely she would remain invisible, just another servant. The table roared with laughter. People from nearby tables glanced over, curious. But since the language was foreign to most of them, they did not understand what was so funny. They only saw a group of wealthy men laughing loudly while a waitress walked away quietly. Layla's steps did not break, her tray balanced perfectly, but her heart burned with a mix of pain and determination. She moved into the kitchen for a moment, letting the noise of dishes and rushing staff drown out the sound of his voice in her head. She leaned against the counter, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. She thought of her father's words, that respect is not given by wealth but by character. She thought of her mother's tired hands weaving crafts late into the night, and she thought of her brother studying, full of hope. She reminded herself that she was more than the uniform she wore, more than the job she had now. She carried knowledge, languages, and strength inside her. Back at the table, the billionaire continued, sipping his wine and smirking. He told another story in Arabic, this one about how people like waiters and waitresses never mattered in the bigger picture, how they were shadows in the lives of the powerful. His words came with hand gestures, pointing lightly in Layla's direction as though she were a character in his joke. His companions nodded and laughed again, some of them uncomfortable but unwilling to break the flow. After all, he was the one with the money, the one they wanted to impress. So they laughed, even when it was cruel. Layla returned with their dishes, setting them down with steady hands, the plates heavy with roasted lamb, steamed vegetables, and bowls of caviar. She placed each one carefully, her expression calm, her movements professional, but her mind sharp. She heard the billionaire's mocking words again, now mixed with laughter that seemed louder than before. He whispered about how she looked too serious, how perhaps she didn't even understand what was happening around her. And then, almost as if daring, "Fate," he said again in Arabic, that poor people like her could never stand in the same world as men like him. The moment felt heavy, like a storm building in the distance. Layla's heart beat faster. She wanted to respond right then, to let him know that every word had been heard and understood. But she held back, waiting for the right time. She told herself that silence now was not weakness, it was patience, it was the gathering of strength, because when the moment came, her reply would carry more weight than all his mocking laughter combined. She smiled politely, bowed her head slightly, and walked away from the table, leaving the billionaire to believe his joke had gone unnoticed. The billionaire leaned back, proud of himself, his laughter echoing across the restaurant like a challenge to anyone who dared to question him. He loved the idea that the waitress had no clue, that she was just a silent servant in his world of wealth. His companions kept laughing, their voices blending into the background of the restaurant. But at that table, arrogance sat heavy, dripping from every word, every smirk, every cruel joke. Yet they did not know that the story they thought they controlled was about to turn against them. For Layla, the mockery did not crush her spirit, it lit a fire instead. It reminded her of why she worked so hard, why she studied late at night when others slept, why she never gave up. She carried the weight of her family's hopes, the memory of her parents' sacrifices, and the strength of her own dreams. Each cruel word only pushed her further into determination. She walked through the glamorous restaurant, carrying trays and glasses as if nothing had happened. But inside, her heart whispered that soon, very soon, she would speak, and when she did, every eye in the room would see her differently. The mockery continued at the table, the laughter spilling out, but fate was turning quietly. The chandelier above still sparkled, the pianist still played softly, and the guests around the room still enjoyed their meals. But hidden beneath the surface, the story was shifting. The arrogance of one man was planting the seed of his own humiliation, and the quiet waitress he mocked was about to become the voice that silenced his laughter. Layla returned to the kitchen carrying an empty tray, her face calm as always, but inside her chest her heart was heavy. The words of the billionaire echoed in her mind, every cruel sentence in Arabic replayed as if he had whispered them directly into her ear. She tried to shake them off, but they stayed, clinging like thorns. She knew her job meant dealing with difficult customers. But this was different. This was personal. It was not just a man complaining about slow service or cold food. It was a man mocking her very existence, as if her dreams and her worth were nothing. She leaned against the counter for a moment, closing her eyes, and remembered the lessons her father used to give her. He was not a rich man. He had never worn a suit or owned a shiny watch. But he was rich in wisdom. He always told her that dignity lives inside, that no one can take it from you unless you hand it over. His voice came back to her now, reminding her that wealth without respect was empty, reminding her that no matter how much money someone carried, it could not buy true honor. She breathed slowly, letting those words settle in her heart. Her mind wandered to her childhood, the small home with cracked walls, her mother's hands weaving crafts late into the night, her brothers studying by the dim light of a single lamp. They had struggled, yes, but they had also laughed together. They had also dreamed. She remembered sitting on the floor with her books, repeating words in different languages, English, French, and especially Arabic, practicing for hours until her tongue moved smoothly. She wanted to become an interpreter one day, to stand between cultures, to turn words into bridges. She studied when others slept, because she believed in a better tomorrow. Now here she was, serving in a glamorous restaurant, wearing a uniform that hid all her dreams. People looked at her and saw only a waitress, but inside she carried more knowledge than many of the men she served. It hurt her that the billionaire thought he could strip her dignity with a few mocking words, but it also gave her strength, because his arrogance reminded her of why she fought so hard to rise above. She whispered silently to herself, promising that she would not let his cruelty define her, promising that she would stand tall, even in silence. The sound of laughter from the dining area reached her even in the kitchen, sharp and cruel. It made her chest tighten. But she did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears gave power to those who mocked you. Instead, she straightened her back and fixed her uniform. She would not show weakness, not to him, not to anyone. She looked at her reflection in the small mirror by the service counter. Her eyes were tired but fierce, her lips pressed in determination. She reminded herself that she had survived worse. She had faced poverty, hunger, and nights of doubt. This man was only another test. As she walked back out, her tray balanced perfectly, she noticed how some guests at other tables smiled at her kindly. These small gestures reminded her that not everyone was cruel. There were people who saw her as human, who understood the value of respect. She let those small moments carry her forward. She knew she could not control how the billionaire behaved, but she could control how she responded, and she refused to let him win by breaking her spirit. She moved gracefully between tables. Her silence stronger than his laughter, her calmness louder than his cruelty. But even as she carried on with her work, she was torn inside. Part of her wanted to ignore him completely, to let his words fall into emptiness. After all, what did it matter what a man like him thought? He lived in a world far from hers. His opinion could not shape her destiny. Yet another part of her burned with the desire to answer, to show him that she was not blind or deaf, to remind him that respect was not his to give or take. She imagined speaking to him in his own language, turning his cruel joke into his own humiliation. The thought alone gave her strength. Her inner struggle grew with every step. She carried trays, poured drinks, smiled at guests, but inside her heart was at war. One voice told her to stay quiet, to avoid trouble, to do her job and leave without incident. Another voice told her that silence would mean surrender, that she would carry the weight of his mockery long after the night ended. She asked herself what dignity meant. Was it keeping peace and ignoring cruelty? Or was it standing up when someone tried to crush her spirit? She knew the answer was not simple, but deep inside she felt that courage often came disguised as risk. She thought of her brother again, his young face full of hope. What lesson would she want to give him? To let people walk over you, or to show that respect must be demanded when it is denied? She thought of her mother's tired smile. How proud she would be if Layla stood up for herself. She thought of her father's words about honor, and realized that this moment, though small in the eyes of the world, was a test of everything she had been taught. She could not stay silent forever, not when her heart told her that silence would mean losing herself. Layla took another deep breath, her decision quietly forming in her mind. She would not answer recklessly, she would not throw her words in anger. But when the time was right, she would respond, and her response would be calm, clear, and undeniable. She would use the very language he thought was his shield. She would show him that he had underestimated her, and in doing so, she would remind everyone in the room that respect was not bought with money but earned with character. The thought settled her inner struggle, turning her pain into quiet resolve. She walked back toward his table, her heart steady now, the laughter still loud but no longer cutting. Because she had already decided, she would not remain the shadow he thought she was. She would not let his mockery pass as if she had not heard. The fire in her chest had transformed into strength. And though he did not know it yet, the billionaire had already lost. Because the waitress he mocked was no longer struggling inside, she was ready. Ready to speak, ready to stand, ready to remind him that arrogance can fall in a single moment of truth. The restaurant glowed with golden lights, the air filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. At the center table the billionaire leaned back in his chair, his voice booming in Arabic as he continued to mock. He had no idea that his words were not falling on deaf ears. He believed he was safe, hidden behind a language that the waitress could never understand. His friends laughed with him, each one pretending to enjoy his cruel humor. They wanted his approval, so they echoed his laughter, even when some of them felt uneasy inside. Layla walked toward the table once more, her tray steady in her hands, her steps slow but confident, her heart beat faster, yet her face showed nothing but calm. Inside her mind she repeated her decision. She would not stay silent anymore. She would not let his words go unanswered. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment when the mask of patience would drop and the truth would speak louder than wealth. She stopped at the table, her eyes meeting his for the first time. And in that instant something shifted. The laughter grew quieter as if the air itself held its breath. The billionaire smirked when he saw her return. He whispered another joke in Arabic, this time making fun of the way she walked, saying she carried herself too seriously for someone whose only role was to serve food. His friends chuckled, but their laughter was softer now, because they noticed something in her eyes, something sharp, something steady. Layla placed the dishes carefully on the table, then straightened her back, and without raising her voice, she spoke, her words flowing in fluent Arabic, clear, confident, and strong. The table froze, forks in midair, glasses paused before lips. Layla repeated the words he had just said, mimicking his mocking tone. But then she turned them around. She told him calmly that true dignity was not found in mocking others, but in showing respect. She reminded him that wealth was a gift, but character was a choice. Her voice did not tremble. Every syllable came with precision, her Arabic smooth and flawless. The same language he had used to insult her now became the weapon of her reply. The billionaire's smirk vanished. His face stiffened as if the ground beneath him had shaken. He had never imagined that the waitress he mocked could understand him, let alone answer back in the same language. His friends looked at one another, their eyes wide. Some covered their mouths in shock, others simply stared. The entire table was silent. The only sound left was the pianist in the corner, his music now carrying through the room like a soft background to the scene. Nearby diners noticed the silence and turned their heads, curious about what had happened. Layla did not stop there. She looked directly into the billionaire's eyes and told him that every person's job mattered, that serving food with honesty was more honorable than mocking someone while hiding behind wealth. She reminded him that people like her, though unseen, carried dreams, hopes, and strength that money could never measure. She said these words softly, but each one carried weight, like stones falling into a still pond, creating ripples that reached every corner of the room. The billionaire shifted in his seat, his fingers tightening around his glass, his pride wounded in front of his own companions. He tried to laugh, but no sound came out. His throat felt dry. His friends avoided his eyes. Some of them even looked at Layla with new respect. They had laughed before, but now they were embarrassed, because she had revealed the truth. She had exposed his arrogance, and done so without raising her voice, without anger, only with dignity and strength. The other guests in the restaurant could not understand the words, but they felt the tension. They saw the change. They saw a waitress standing tall while a billionaire sat silent. For once his presence no longer commanded the room. It was her voice that carried power, her calm reply in his own language that turned the tables completely. The pianist glanced toward the scene, his fingers pausing for a moment, then continuing with softer notes, as if he too felt the shift in energy. Layla, after delivering her reply, did not wait for his reaction. She placed the final plate on the table, bowed her head slightly, and walked away with the same grace she had carried all night. But inside she felt lighter, stronger, freer, her heart no longer burdened with silence. She had spoken, she had defended her dignity, and she had done it without losing her calm, without stepping out of her professionalism. It was not anger that guided her. It was pride, it was truth, and it was respect for herself. At the table, the billionaire sat frozen, his mind racing. He wanted to regain control, to find a way to laugh it off. But the moment was gone. His friends no longer laughed. They no longer looked at him with admiration. Instead they looked at him with a mixture of surprise and discomfort. The power he once held in the room had slipped away, taken by the very person he had tried to belittle. The waitress who had turned his joke into his defeat. The silence around the table stretched for a long moment, then the restaurant slowly returned to its rhythm. Conversations picked up again, laughter rose from other tables. But for the billionaire and his companions, the evening had changed forever. Layla's words lingered in the air. They could not be erased. They had struck deeper than any insult could, and though the chandelier still sparkled, though the food still steamed, the taste of humiliation sat heavy on his tongue. Layla walked back into the kitchen, her heart steady now. She thought of her parents, her brother, her dreams, and she felt proud. She knew she had taken a risk, but it was worth it, because she had reminded herself and everyone who saw that moment that respect belongs to all, not just the wealthy. She smiled faintly as she continued her work, serving others with the same calm grace. But inside she carried the quiet victory of having answered arrogance with truth, and she knew this night would stay in her memory forever. The air inside the restaurant changed the very second Layla's words fell from her lips. Moments before there had been loud laughter, the arrogant voice of the billionaire, the clinking of glasses as his friends cheered him on. But now all of that had turned into silence, heavy and awkward silence, the kind of silence that spreads quickly and makes everyone nearby notice. The pianist in the corner kept playing softly, but even his notes seemed hesitant, as if the piano, too, felt the sudden shift in the atmosphere. At the billionaire's table no one moved, forks hovered over plates, glasses remained half-raised. His companions stared at Layla with open mouths, unable to hide their shock. They had laughed along with him, thinking the waitress was nothing more than a shadow, someone who could never understand the language of their mockery. But now she had replied in that very language, fluently and fearlessly, and it was not just a reply, it was a mirror. She had repeated his cruel words back to him before, showing him the meaning of true dignity. It left them stunned, embarrassed, and small. The billionaire himself looked different. His face that had been full of pride now turned stiff, his smirk gone, his eyes wide, his cheeks slightly red. He tried to compose himself, but the humiliation was too sharp. He had always been the man who controlled the room, who laughed the loudest, who made others feel small. But tonight the smallest person in his eyes, a waitress in a simple uniform, had taken all that power away from him in a single calm reply. The weight of it sat heavy on his chest, and for once he had no words. The guests at nearby tables had noticed the sudden silence. They had seen the exchange, even if they did not understand the language. They saw the way the billionaire had been laughing and pointing before, and then the way the waitress stood tall, her voice clear, her eyes sharp, her calm presence filling the air with something strong. Whispers spread quickly among them. Couples leaned toward each other asking what had happened. Some smiled knowingly, as if they did not need to understand the words to feel the justice in the air. Others looked at Layla with admiration, their eyes following her as she walked away gracefully. The staff too noticed. Waiters carrying trays slowed their steps, glancing at the scene. The manager, who had been standing near the bar, watched carefully. His eyes shining with pride, though he tried not to show it too openly. He had seen his employees struggle with rude customers before, but rarely had he witnessed such composure, such courage. He knew Layla had taken a risk, because speaking back to a powerful guest could cost her job. Yet she had done it with such calm and dignity that it did not feel like defiance. It felt like truth, and truth has a power of its own. Some of the billionaire's companions shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their laughter gone, their smiles stiff. They avoided meeting his eyes, because deep down they felt ashamed, ashamed for laughing, ashamed for letting the mockery go on, and now embarrassed because they had been silenced by a young woman they had thought beneath them. One of them reached for his drink quickly, sipping to hide his face. Another forced a cough as if to break the tension. But nothing could erase what had just happened. Nothing could erase the look of quiet triumph in Layla's eyes as she walked away. The billionaire finally tried to laugh, a weak, hollow laugh, as if to suggest that it had all been a joke. But the sound fell flat. No one at the table joined him, not this time. His power over the group had cracked, and everyone could feel it. He lowered his glass back onto the table with a heavy hand, staring down at his food. But the roasted lamb and caviar no longer tasted like victory. It tasted bitter, flavored with humiliation. He picked up his fork, then set it down again, suddenly not hungry, suddenly aware that the restaurant no longer saw him as the man in control. At other tables, some guests smiled softly. A man whispered to his wife that the waitress must have given him a piece of her mind. Another woman nodded proudly as if she too had felt mocked many times before in life and now felt represented. Though they did not know the exact words, they knew the feeling, and that feeling spread through the room like a quiet wave. It was the kind of silent applause that does not use hands, only hearts. A shared understanding that someone had stood up against arrogance and won. Layla, meanwhile, continued her work as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She carried trays, refilled glasses, smiled politely. But inside her chest she felt lighter, stronger. She did not look back at the table. She did not need to. She knew her words had landed. She knew the billionaire had been shaken. And she knew the room had felt it too. She did not need applause. She did not need thanks. The pride she carried within was enough. It warmed her like a quiet fire, steady and unshakable. The manager approached her quietly when she returned to the kitchen for a moment, his voice low but full of respect. He told her she had handled herself with grace, that he had never seen anyone stand so firmly while still keeping their professionalism. His words gave her more confidence. Though she only nodded humbly, she did not do it for praise. She did it because she could not allow herself to be silent when her dignity was attacked. She reminded herself again of her father's words, and felt proud that she had honored them. Back at the billionaire's table the mood was broken. The laughter did not return. The companions ate quietly, glancing now and then at their powerful friend. But his face remained cold, his pride too wounded to recover. He chewed without tasting, he drank without enjoying, because he could not stop hearing her words in his mind, words in his own language, words that stripped him of the shield he thought he had. The more he tried to ignore it, the deeper they echoed, reminding him that respect was not something money could buy. The restaurant returned to its normal rhythm, but beneath the surface everything had changed. Layla had spoken. The billionaire had been silenced, and everyone who witnessed it carried a piece of that moment in their memory. For some it was a story to whisper about later. For others it was an inspiration. A reminder that arrogance can be broken, even in the most unexpected ways. And though the music played, the food was served, and the lights still sparkled, the heart of the room now beat differently, because the waitress who was mocked had become the quiet hero of the night. The night had already changed. The laughter that once rolled from the billionaire's table had vanished. The air of arrogance that floated around him seemed to dissolve, and in its place was an awkward silence. The billionaire sat quietly, his fork resting untouched on his plate. His companions avoided his eyes, and Layla moved on with her work, her steps calm and graceful. She did not gloat. She did not even look back, because she knew her reply had already spoken louder than anything else. Yet what followed proved that the power of dignity always leaves a mark far deeper than pride ever can. As Layla walked through the restaurant, carrying trays and pouring glasses, something strange happened. The eyes of other guests followed her, not with pity, not with dismissal, but with quiet admiration. They had seen how she stood tall against arrogance, how she had defended her dignity without anger, and even without shouting. She had done it in a way that carried respect. Her reply had not been meant to humiliate, but to remind, to show that every person deserves honor, and that simple truth touched the hearts of those who witnessed it. The manager watched her closely, pride filling his chest. He had worked with many waiters and waitresses over the years, but never had he seen someone handle such a moment with such composure. Many would have either broken into tears or exploded in anger. But Layla had chosen a third path, calm and clear, a path that earned her not just survival but respect. When she returned to the kitchen for a brief moment, he leaned close to her and whispered softly, telling her that she had made the restaurant proud. His words were few, but his tone was heavy with admiration, and Layla felt a warmth spread through her heart. The staff too looked at her differently now. The cooks in the back nodded when she passed. The other waiters gave her small smiles. They had all seen her endure rude customers before, and they knew how hard it was to stay calm. Many of them had felt helpless in the face of insults, but now they saw one of their own rise above it, and it gave them courage. It reminded them that they were not invisible, that their worth was not measured by the arrogance of those they served. In that moment Layla became more than just a colleague. She became an example. Meanwhile, at another table, a man in a dark suit had been watching everything. He was not part of the billionaire's group. He was a guest from out of town, quiet and observant. He had noticed the way Layla handled herself, her steady voice, her fluent Arabic, and her calm dignity. When she passed by his table later, he stopped her politely and introduced himself. He told her he was impressed, not only by her courage but also by her language skills. Then he handed her a small business card, with the name of his translation company printed neatly on it. He said softly that if she ever wanted a chance to work beyond the restaurant, she should contact him. Layla took the card carefully, her hands almost trembling. She looked at it for a moment, then at the man, and saw genuine kindness in his eyes. She smiled politely and thanked him, her voice quiet but grateful. She slipped the card into her apron pocket and continued her work. But inside her chest her heart swelled with hope. She had dreamed for years of using her languages, of becoming an interpreter, and now a door had quietly opened, all because she had chosen not to stay silent when her dignity was mocked. Back at the billionaire's table, the atmosphere remained heavy. His companions ate quietly, their earlier laughter gone. The billionaire himself stayed stiff, his pride wounded. He tried to focus on his food, but the taste was gone. He tried to sip his wine, but it felt bitter. No amount of money or luxury could erase the sting of being silenced by the very person he had tried to belittle. His friends gave him respectful distance. But deep down they too saw him differently now. The man they once admired for his confidence had been humbled in front of their eyes. Layla, however, did not carry herself as if she had won a battle. She carried herself simply as she always did, calm, steady, professional. But with a quiet glow in her eyes, the glow of someone who had reclaimed her respect. She smiled at other guests. She listened carefully to orders. She walked gracefully, as though the heavy weight inside her had lifted. She knew she had risked much. But she also knew that risk had brought her a victory no money could buy. She had shown herself, and everyone else, that respect is not a gift from the rich. It is a right that belongs to all. The whispers around the restaurant did not stop. Guests spoke softly to one another, retelling what they had seen. Some said the waitress had spoken to the billionaire in his own tongue. Others said she had reminded him of humility. The details shifted from table to table, but the feeling remained the same. Respect for the young woman who dared to speak, admiration for her courage. Her presence had grown beyond her uniform. She was no longer just a waitress in their eyes. She was the person who had stood tall in a place where most would have bowed their heads. As the night moved on, the billionaire finished his meal in silence. He no longer called out loudly. He no longer joked with his companions. He signed the bill with a stiff hand and left the restaurant without a word. His expensive shoes echoing across the marble floor. The doors closed behind him, and just like that, the room felt lighter. It was as if the arrogance had walked out with him, leaving behind only the memory of the moment when power shifted, when respect had been reclaimed by someone who was never meant to be noticed. Layla continued her duties until the night ended, but every step carried a new strength. She thought of her father's words again. She thought of her mother's tired but proud eyes, and she thought of her brother's future. She realized that tonight was not just about answering a cruel man. It was about proving to herself that she was capable of standing tall no matter how heavy the weight of arrogance pressed against her. She had earned the respect of strangers, her co-workers, her manager, and, most importantly, herself. When she finally left the restaurant, the cool night air brushed her face, the city lights twinkled like stars, and she walked home with steady steps, her uniform still plain, her shoes still worn, but her spirit glowing brighter than ever. She slipped her hand into her pocket and touched the business card again. Feeling the possibility it carried, the hope it promised, she smiled to herself, knowing that respect had been earned, dignity had been defended, and perhaps, just perhaps, her future was beginning to open before her eyes. The night finally came to an end. The last guests left the restaurant, and the sound of footsteps on the marble floor faded into silence. Waiters stacked chairs, polished tables, and swept the floors. The chandeliers still glowed, but their shine felt softer now, as if even the lights were tired after a long evening. Layla hung her apron in the small staff room. Her body ached from hours of carrying heavy trays and walking back and forth, but her heart carried a strange kind of peace. She knew tonight was not just another shift. It was a night that would stay with her forever. She stepped out into the cool night air. The streets were quieter now, the hum of cars softer than during the day. The stars peeked faintly through the haze of city lights. She walked slowly, her shoes tapping against the pavement, her mind replaying the events of the evening, the mocking laughter, the sharp words in Arabic, the silence that followed her reply, and the way the entire restaurant had shifted after she spoke. Each moment came back to her, not with pain this time, but with pride. She had stood tall when it mattered most. As she walked, she thought of her father's words again, that respect is something you carry inside, that no one can take it away unless you let them. She felt now that those words had lived through her actions tonight. She had not let arrogance crush her. She had not let money silence her. Instead, she had spoken with dignity, and in doing so, she had reminded everyone, even herself, of her true worth. She smiled faintly, knowing her father would have been proud if he had seen her. Her thoughts shifted to her mother. She imagined her sitting at their small table at home, weaving crafts with tired fingers, always telling Layla to stay strong, to never forget her dreams. Layla whispered into the night that she had not forgotten, that she was still chasing those dreams, and tonight had proven that she was ready for more. The business card in her pocket pressed against her hand as she walked, a reminder that opportunities often come when you least expect them, sometimes hidden inside a moment of courage. She thought of her brother too, studying with determination, believing in a future brighter than their past. She realized that the lesson tonight was not just hers. It was his as well. She wanted to tell him that no matter who tries to belittle you, no matter how powerful they seem. You must never bow your head. Dignity is not about what job you do, or how much money you have. Dignity lives in how you carry yourself, in how you respect others and demand respect in return. She wanted him to know that even a waitress in a simple uniform could silence a billionaire with truth. As she reached a quiet corner of the street, she sat for a moment on a bench, the cool wind brushing her face. She closed her eyes and let herself breathe deeply. She remembered the look on the billionaire's face when she replied to him, the way his pride shattered in silence, and she realized something important. The lesson was not only for her, it was for him too. Perhaps for the first time in years, someone had dared to hold a mirror to his arrogance, to remind him that wealth does not make you untouchable. Maybe he would never admit it. Maybe he would forget by morning. But somewhere inside him, her words would remain. The lesson of the night stretched wider than just one man and one waitress. It was about the world itself, how often people judge others by clothes, by jobs, by money, forgetting that behind every uniform there is a human being with dreams, with knowledge, with value. Layla realized that people may not always see your worth, but that does not mean it disappears. It lives inside you, and sometimes it only takes one moment of courage to show it to the world, even if the world does not expect it. She stood up again, her steps steady now, her body still tired but her spirit strong. She thought of how the restaurant had reacted, the whispers, the looks of admiration, the small smiles from strangers. She understood that her actions had touched more people than she had realized. She had not planned to become a symbol. She had only wanted to defend her own dignity. But in doing so, she had shown others that respect belongs to everyone. Rich or poor, powerful or powerless, it is a simple truth. But sometimes the world needs to be reminded. When she finally reached home, her mother opened the door, surprised to see her daughter smiling despite the long shift. Layla hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth of family. She did not tell her everything that happened right away. But she knew one day she would share the story, and when she did, her family would understand why she had walked taller that night, why her eyes carried a new glow. They would see that something had changed, not in her uniform, not in her shoes, but deep inside her spirit. As she lay in bed later, staring at the ceiling, she slipped the business card out of her pocket and held it in her hand. The small piece of paper felt heavier than it looked, because it carried possibility, it carried the promise of change. She whispered to herself that she would call, that she would not let this chance slip away, and with that thought, she closed her eyes, her heart filled with both peace and determination. Far away, the billionaire too lay awake, his mind restless, his pride still stung. He replayed the moment when the waitress had spoken in perfect Arabic, when the laughter at his table had died, when the room no longer belonged to him. He turned in his bed, unsettled, because he realized he had been wrong. His wealth had not protected him from humiliation. His arrogance had not silenced her, instead her dignity had silenced him. Though he would never say it aloud, though he might try to bury the memory, he too carried the lesson, that respect cannot be mocked away, and that arrogance can crumble in a single moment. And so the night ended, but the story did not, because lessons like these do not stay locked in a single evening. They travel, they live in memories, they grow into inspiration. The guests at the restaurant would tell the tale. The staff would remember it. Layla's family would one day hear it, and perhaps even the billionaire would never fully forget it. It was not just a story of a waitress and a wealthy man. It was a story about dignity, about courage, about the truth that respect belongs to every human being, and that sometimes, the quietest voice can echo the loudest.